The next part is what we call the risk assessment scale. Now, the risk assessment scale is you look at the likelihood of a risk to occur and the impact that it would have if it were to occur. Now, this requires shading, and this shading is actually systematic shading because you need to define the likelihood of that risk happening and the impact that it would have. So if a risk has a likelihood of occurring, and for instance, if it were to occur, it would have a significant impact, then your shading should actually show that it is something that you need to respond to very quickly. So I will just bring you down to the key on the table so that you can understand how the shading has actually been conducted. So in terms of the risk description, you can actually categorize it into risk level 1 to 5 or 6 to 15 or level 16 to 25. Okay. Again, this description of the risk is going to be devised or developed by you. If the risk level, okay, so for instance, let me give you an example. When you look at the risk assessment, when you ask yourself certain questions about the programs that you are going to conduct, for instance, the example I was using was, if you had described a risk, saying you're a shop owner and say an old woman walked into the store and the floor was wet, the likelihood of the person falling down, if we look at the point where it says risk assessment, is actually quite high, as in there is a potential impact that it would happen, and it's definitely it would definitely happen that the person will sleep. So if that likelihood, okay, were to happen, the impact of an old lady falling down in a shop is that she would definitely or most likely break her bones, or the impact is that it would definitely affect her as compared to somebody who's young and fit. So it means that the impact of that would be high. It would actually be a red risk, you know, a high risk under the level red, if you look at the category. And it's something that you definitely would want to ensure that you always put a sign saying wet floor. Okay? But if you had a risk that it's likely to occur that in your shop, it's likely to occur that maybe if you have eggs that you sell in your shop, it's likely to occur that the eggs can go bad. Okay, so now the impact of the eggs going bad could actually be something that can potentially affect you, but it won't affect your reputation, or it won't really have such a bad significant impact. But what you could do to reduce that kind of risk is to ensure that you have proper, stock management. Like the stuff that is going to go bad first is, put first on the shelf. So that you would actually categorize under an orange risk, as in the potential of it happening is high, but the impact that it would have if it were to happen would not be such a big, severe impact. Okay. Then again, if you had some kind of risk, like in shops, like this is again taking the example of shops, on the display shelves when people are taking stuff, things fall off the shelf, which is, yes, it's likely to happen, yes, but the impact it will have if things fall on the shelf, especially if they're just vegetables, that kind of thing, is just really minor. It might be bruised or something. So that is kind of described as a low risk, and you would give it a green coding. Now remember, the coding is up to you. The simpler the coding for you, it is easier for you to understand. But what we did in the risk assessment, as in looking at the likelihood of a risk happening and the impact of the risk happening, can actually be put into what we call a ranking. Okay, and so this ranking you actually come up with yourself. Okay, so if you were to rank a risk and say, from a scale of 1 to 5, if the risk is likely to occur, okay, and it has a high impact, like for instance somebody breaking their bones in your shop, that's got a very big impact on your reputation and everything, you would give that ranking as number 1, okay, which means it requires your immediate attention. You need to do everything to make sure wet flow signs are there, or people tell people that, listen, can you use the other aisles if it's possible, because if that risk were to occur, it would have severe impact on you. Okay, so number 1 means we need to spend a lot of money to do everything in our power to reduce the risk of this happening. Number 2, if you look at your risk that you have described and you think about it and you think, okay, even though this risk is likely to occur, and it might have some kind of a medium impact, as in it will definitely have an effect, but not as major as number 1, you still know that you need to put money aside, you need to respond to it within reason. Okay, and then if you gave your risks, I mean, you could reduce the ranking of the risks that you give yourself so that you don't have so many colors. But again, it sort of depends on the different programs that you're doing, the different activities you're doing, the sensitivities within the activities that you're doing. So another ranking that we have on this register, risk register number 3, is if a risk were to happen and the impact, and it's described, is number 3, it should be acted upon. So again, it has a significant enough impact that you need to act upon it, but it's not as severe as 1 and 2. Again, number 4 is given a ranking, it's in color blue. It says you should require serious attention, as in there's a likelihood of this risk happening. The impact is that it would definitely have an impact, but not a reputational, not so bad of an impact, but it still requires you to spend some kind of resources in order to address it. Whilst number 5, they put as an acceptable risk. So acceptable risks will actually come into the category where it has a minor impact, okay? So it's not something that you really need to spend money, time, or resources in addressing. So you can come up with your own risk ranking, so like you have a key of, okay, if we assess our risks and look at the likelihood of the risk occurring and the impact it has, within that ranking, can we give it a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5? And the 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 will indicate to you how you deal with it and how quickly you also deal with that risk. So ranking goes together with your risk assessment, especially as you go further into your into defining your risks. Okay, so remember, as we looked at this risk assessment with only the 3 colors, as in red, green, and yellow, if there's a likelihood of your risk occurring, and the likelihood of that risk occurring, like if the floor is wet, is high, and the impact that you have assessed is high, it means that you really need to spend resources to deal with it and address it as soon as possible. But if you probably say the likelihood of this risk occurring is medium, and the impact it might have is medium, then you still need to respond to it, but not as quickly as you would respond to the high risks. So This just requires you to sit down with your team and assess your risk, especially because you need to make profits, and especially because you need your reputation to stay well, all right, as you carry on implementing, and also because it's very important to be mitigating your risks. It's better that you're planning on how to reduce your risk than get to the point of a risk and have to spend a lot of money to reduce that risk. Okay, so here, for example, in the example that they had with the outstanding silk loan members, they assessed that if the likelihood of outstanding loans not being repaid was high, the likelihood was medium and the impact was medium. I guess the reason was medium is because in most cases, the way the silk structure is, or the savings group structure is that even if somebody were to default to pay, it would mean that it affects the whole group, but it won't affect them to such a large extent that they won't be able to recover any kind of profit. So I guess that's why the impact is medium, okay? But if it was only a 3-people savings group, I guess the impact would be high if one person was defaulting and had not repaid back their loans. So the next thing you need to do after having known the likelihood and the impact, as in the risk assessment schedule, is what strategy are you going to implement in order to reduce the risk, okay? And in here, the example they had was to conduct improvement of the constitution, because as people begin to say they agree a constitution and the parameters and the boundaries within it, that if somebody were to default, this would what will happen, or this is the next thing that would happen. And they've talked about adapting penalizing, or how to penalize people who are not repaying back the loan, because obviously they live in the same community, so it's not as if somebody got the money and just totally disappeared. So that is probably why this risk is given this kind of ranking. And the person that is owning this particular risk is the person who works in this program, which is the savings group program. And again, risk management is a very strategic tool which everybody needs to be in line with, but more so is actually very, very strategic. So if you had a person who's like in a strategic management position in the organization, they would need to link the risks into the strategic plan, because as you draw up a strategic plan for the next operating years, as in 2 years or 3 years, you need to identify your risks and show how, as an organization, you're going to learn and grow and be dealing with those risks to reduce them. So here you would actually put the objective. So if it was under objective, I don't know, 5 of your strategic work plan, that, the risks associated, with savings loans will be reduced. You could possibly even give the amount that you expect to reduce it by through the activities that you're going to be doing in the mitigation strategy plan. Okay,